We started the day with two TYPO3 sessions, the future of TYPO3 and TYPO3 version 8 going to the cloud, and then we had some other interesting sessions about some different topics, and now we're going to close the day with some TYPO3 stuff again. A little bit about us. We are located very close to the Stuttgart airport. This is our office. Let me dim the light a little bit, so it's late in the evening. Okay, so you can see this a little bit better. This is our marvelous team of TYPO3 enthusiasts. There are also 6 certified integrators and certified developers in this picture. And what we do is mainly we are a TYPO3 hosting provider. We also do all other stuff in TYPO3, so we're a TYPO3 agency. We do TYPO3 projects and consulting and workshops and things like that, but the main business is TYPO3 hosting. And currently we host over 36,000 TYPO3 domains and about 120,000 MySQL databases, and I'm coming back to the databases a little bit later. This is what actually, these are part of our servers, the actual servers we are running, just a couple of racks, but what you see here is about €500,000 in hardware, so it's a rather expensive thing. Well, why does performance matter? Well, if you have a happy website visitor because the page is loading fast, we have a happy customer, and then the provider is happy. So all the people are happy if the websites are fast. And of course what you have to do is you have to do some server monitoring, and this is just an example of one of our servers. And what we try to achieve a very good performance on the server side is that we are managing the load on our servers. And as you can see here, this is now over the load over 1 week. The average load is 0.1. And as a provider, you have to make sure that the load does not grow above 1, otherwise the server cannot handle all of the requests. But running with an average of 0.1, there are enough reserves if there is some higher demand on those servers. Well, when you launch a new website, you have to think about a couple of things to make sure that TYPO3 is performing as fast as it can. For example, you should disable any unused extensions. For example, extensions you have used during development, or extensions you have installed but then decided not to use them. Just make sure that you uninstall all those unused extensions, because each extension does require some additional work and load on the server side. And then, of course, this is one of the most important things. You should make sure that caching is working. The TYPO3 cache speeds up the websites by a factor of about 10. And if you have a configuration, for example, during development, you have purposely disabled the cache, then you should make sure that you enable it again when you launch the site. There are a couple of extensions which don't behave so nicely. And for example, if an extension uses this code in the second line, then the whole TYPO3 cache is disabled. So you have no caching at all. And this might be just by installing a not so friendly extension. We once had a case with a big university, and they had performance problems on their website. And then they asked us for some consulting and some help on this, and we found out that they had, I don't know, that web page had something like 30,000 content pages. And we found out, well, it seems like the caching is not working correctly. When you look at the database, you see that the cache pages table is filling up with a few pages, but then suddenly it's starting at 0 again. So something is clearing the cache every minute or so. And so then all the pages have to be regenerated again. And then we finally found out there was an extension that they used during development. And what this extension did, whenever you called up a certain page with a plugin, that extension cleared the cache. So it was quite easy just to disable that extension, and then the whole system worked and the performance was much, much better. So even if you think, well, I have made sure that the caching is working, there might be some factors that disable the cache or clear the cache on a frequent basis and so on. So you really should take care that caching is working. One way to do this, if you go into the TYPO3 database, and there are a lot of tables and cache pages and the caching framework and so on, and when you clear the cache, then those tables should be cleared. And when then someone is calling up the website, you should see those tables filling up again with data. And if that does not happen, well, then your caching has some problem. Well, you can further improve the caching. For example, there's a nice extension, NC static file cache. So if you have any pages in your website which are really static, then you can use this extension to just generate the HTML code and store this as a file on disk. And then when this page is being called up, TYPO3 has nothing to do. The server is just serving that HTML file from disk. And this can speed up the delivery of those pages by a factor of something like 200. So that's very nice if you have static pages. However, if you have any dynamic content on the page, they will not be cached. Then you can, of course, speed up the delivery of pages by using some additional caching solutions like a Redis cache, which is basically an in-memory cache, which you can enable in the TYPO3 caching configuration. And you can add another server in front of your server, so like running a Varnish cache, but this increases the complexity of your website. You need basically two servers, you need the configuration, you need to configure the ports for your domain correctly and so on. So that is a little bit more work to do. Of course, you should make sure that in your htaccess file that you enable browser caching, so to make sure that the files that you send from the server to the browser, that they are cached in the browser and not requested with each page load. And you can specify for how long those static assets should be cached. Then, of course, one important thing is to enable compression. It's not enabled in TYPO3 by default, but you can, in the install tool, so you can set the compression level from the front end for the front end and back end with a value greater than 0. And then you just need those 7 lines of code in your htaccess file so that your website is being delivered properly. Then you can use the deflate module from Apache to also compress all the files that you're sending. So that's also another thing, quite easy to implement. Then you certainly should make sure that you don't, or that you reduce the number of requests that you're sending from the browser to the server. And I've just looked up a website you might know, T3EE16, but this is just one example of the of websites. You can see many other websites that have similar problems. If you just load the start page of T3EE16, the browser is sending 143 requests to the server, and the server has to send back 103 data items. Now, when you consider that in the connection between the browser and the server, you can have a maximum of 6 requests in parallel. So basically what happens is, when you load the page, you send the first request to the server sends back the HTML file, Then the browser looks all the links that are in the HTML file, and the browser finds 142 additional links, and then he requests the first 6. And when those 6 have been served from the server, then the next 6 are being requested. So because you don't have 140 parallel connections between the browser and the server, this is what actually really slows down the whole process. Then for this one website, you have 85 images, a total of something a bit over 4 megabytes of data. There are 27 JavaScript files and 10 CSS files, all requested individually. Okay, what can you do to overcome the situation? There are some settings in TYPO3, config concatenate JS and concatenate CSS, so that you just bundle all those CSS and JS files together. Then you can use sprites for icons, for example. In this example from a website, rather than loading 10 icons individually with 10 requests, all those icons are put into one PNG file, and then there's one request being made to that file. It's stored in the browser, it's cached in the browser, and then using CSS, it's only that icon that you actually need on the website is then being displayed. So you're saving 9 requests by just using such a sprite and delivering one file instead of 10 files. Another good way to try to optimize the speed of your website, or to find out if your website is slow, what is happening, you can use the TYPO3 admin panel. The admin panel has been with TYPO3, I think, since the early beginning version 3.2 or something like that, but it has improved over time. And when you enable it, then below your website, you will find a little box, and you can pop it open, and then you can have those settings, and there is one section which is called TYPO3. And when you enable track content rendering and force TS rendering, then you see how much time TYPO3 is spending on the individual items. For example, you can see here in the third line, to pass the template, TYPO3 needs 74 milliseconds, or here there's a page object fluid template, 23 milliseconds, or here some other fluid content, 26 milliseconds. Sometimes you may find that if you have a very complex menu item on your website, that the menu, the generation of the menu actually takes quite a long time. And then there are some tricks what you can do, that you generate the code for the menu once, store it in the database, and then call it from there, rather than recalculating it with every page request. Oops, oh, I did something wrong. Pressed the wrong button. Now let's take a look at the databases. And since we are running about 120,000 of them, we have to monitor those databases and see what's happening and going on. Typically, what you would expect if you launch a new website and you measure the performance and you say, well, the performance is great, everyone is happy, and then you would expect that if you don't make any changes to the website, the performance should stay the same. But in reality, you might find out that the performance is decreasing over time. Well, and this is because the database is filling up. And so what you should do is you should take a look on the size of your database. And one thing that we did, every day in the morning we create a little report, and this report lists all of the TYPO3 databases which are over 10 gigabytes in size. And so then we take a look at those databases. Is this okay? Yeah, there's one customer who is storing some solar data from the sunshine, is monitoring that, and this database is 30 gigabytes in size, and that is real data. But there are some other things. We have here a database, and these are all from current active websites. This is a big Swiss news portal, and the size of the database here is 77 gigabyte. And when you look at the database tables, you find out that 76 of those 77 gigabytes are in the table TT news cache. And well, what happens is if you have that many entries and this size of a database, then your system is going to become slower because MySQL has more work to do. So this is one of the things where you should just take care that the database tables don't grow too much. Or we have another example here. We have a database table CF, that's a caching framework, cache pages, 17 gigabytes, or CF cache hash, 67 gigabytes. And you have to think about, well, what is happening here? For example, the cache pages table. There is one setting, config cache clear at midnight, that you can enable so that the database table should be cleared on midnight. But actually, that command is not doing what it says. It doesn't clear the cache at midnight. It only invalidates the data. So it just says, well, all the data that is older than midnight, I'm ignoring this data. But the table is never being cleared. So what you can do as a solution, you make a little cron job, and then you just truncate that table once a day or so, and then you clean up the database. The size of the database is reduced by a factor of 100 or so, and then you can get rid of those problems. Another problem with large databases, here's an example. Indexed search, which is in the standard distribution of TYPO3. It's filling up the database table, so you can see here 20,000 entries here, 3 million entries in the relation table, and so on. But actually, when you look at the tables indexed stat search and indexed stat word, these are the statistics for index search. You can see that index search is not used on that page, but is filling up the database. So there's one very simple thing to do. You can just say, well, in the type of script config index enable equals 0, and then you just disable the indexing, and those tables will not be filled anymore. Another nice example, what can happen, the Syslog table. This is where all kinds of log messages are being stored, and here we have a Syslog table, 7.5 million entries, 3.1 gigabytes in size. And when you look at the entries in this table, you see, well, there's always some error handler with a PHP warning message, missing argument, blah, blah, blah. And when you see at the timestamp here, they're all from the same second. What has happened here, there is a customer, he has a product website, and then when you list the products, there are on one page, there are something like 20 products listed, and for each product you get one error message. So while generating one page, you are writing 20 times to this Syslog table with always the same message. Well, the message itself, PHP warning, illegal string offset attached in, and so on. Then there's here the extension name, and this is just filling up this table. Well, what you can do, the first solution would be you can disable the production exception handler in the install tool. Then those messages are not any longer locked to the file. So that's the quick and dirty solution.
That's very dirty.
Yeah. The better solution is, of course, to fix your PHP code that the warning is no longer being generated, because obviously, although the page works and is loaded correctly and displayed correctly, there must be something wrong in the PHP code, otherwise there would not be this warning. And another tip is there is in the TYPO3 scheduler, there is a task which is the Syslog garbage collection task, and you can run this, for example, once a day or once a week, and it clears all the entries in the Syslog table which are older than a specific amount of days. For example, in this case, deletes all the entries that are older than half a year. Then you should check on the database side whether your query cache is being enabled. And what the query cache is doing is when you send a query to the database and then another user or another task is sending the same query to the database does not need to return or to perform the actual query, it would just return the last result. So this is what the query cache is for. And with this MySQL command, you can see whether the query cache is on and also the size of the query cache, which is 128 megabytes. And there's also another command where you can see some more statistics from the query cache. For example, you can see here, okay, 32,000 queries in the cache, 230,000 cache hits. And so you can see here some statistics to verify that your cache is working. And for those more advanced MySQL users, you can optimize also the parameters like the cache size and so on to fit your actual project. Then you should have a look for slow queries. Slow queries are just queries that you are sending to the database and that take longer than a specified amount of seconds to process. And for example, in this database, you can see here, these are requests that take longer than 3 seconds to process. And you can see here how many database lines need to be evaluated to return the result. The result itself, it's only 5 data items. But for example, you can see here 225,000 data items have to be analyzed to return those 5 results. And of course, if this query is taking 3 or 4 seconds, then the user also has to wait that long until the web page is being generated. Actually, that's the same database that had the TT News cache with 70 gigabytes, or how much that was. And basically, those queries are always very similar. So this is the query which you can just copy from here, from the output. You can just copy the query, and you can see here it's selecting news depending on their categories. And then here at the end you can see limit 5, and then this returns only 5 data points. Now, MySQL has a nice command that helps you to fine-tune or optimize the performance of the database. And the only thing that you have to do is when you execute the query, just add one word at the beginning of the query, which is explain. And then MySQL will give you some data, and it tells you here, okay, from those database tables, it tells you which keys or which indexes exist for that database table. And here you can see whether you have a problem when the indexes for your database are not correctly set. And for example, here you can see this index is working very fine because you have to process only one data item. But for this other index, you have to process for this request, you have to process over 11,000 data rows. So there are some good books on MySQL performance tuning which explain you how to set those indexes for a database correctly, and this explain command can help you find those issues. One important thing when you set up a server for your TYPO3 site, you should make sure that the database is running on the same server as the web server, on the same physical machine. Except in some very, very large applications, where you say, well, you have to have a load balancer, and then you have 5 web servers and 2 database servers and 5 file servers, then this is a little bit different. But for example, the servers that we have, we typically say, well, those servers can generate about 20 million page requests per month. And when the when the database server, the MySQL server, is on the same server, then all the communication between the web server and MySQL is done locally. No data is being sent over the network. But if you have a separate database server, then all these database requests have to go over the network. And even if your network has a very low latency and you say, well, okay, that's less than 1 millisecond, so it's quite fast, and you have a gigabit Ethernet connection between the web server and the database server, our database servers typically process about 250 queries per second. Yeah, 250 queries per second. And if you have a latency of just 1 millisecond, that adds 250 milliseconds. So having a local database server really improves the performance. Then nowadays you should be using SSD as storage, because SSD is much, much faster than standard hard disks. You should make sure that the machines are not overloaded. So, I mean, we could just say, okay, we put many more customers on one machine, because then our financial numbers look much better. The cost is the same, but if we have 5 times the customers on one machine, our profit will be much higher. But then what happens is that you might be overloading the machine, and the server cannot handle all the requests anymore, and you don't have happy website visitors, you don't have happy customers, and at the end we will also be unhappy. You can also use Nginx instead of Apache, which is also a much faster web server. And I think this is one of the last slides. You should make sure that you run the right PHP version for your TYPO3 project. As you can see here, if you're running TYPO3 6.2, you can use it with PHP 5.3 to 5.6. You should use the highest PHP version that is suitable for your TYPO3 installation, because, for example, here in PHP version 5.5, an op cache was included in PHP, so that makes PHP faster by default. And also, if you're using PHP 7, that's much faster than PHP 5. So when your TYPO3 system can support, and your extensions can support higher PHP versions, you should also use that, and you can increase the speed quite dramatically. And if you say, well, I don't have PHP version 7 on my machine, well, then it's about time to think about that, to get it and install it, because starting with version 8, you need PHP 7, and you can no longer use the old PHP 5 version. So, any questions? Yes, Patrick.
It's not a question, it's an addition. You are talking about caching of TYPO3, and what you actually also can do is, a lot of websites have the same header and footer on every page. And when you're using TypoScript for that footer or that header, you can cache the output of that block, that TypoScript block as well. So you can cache the stuff for each and every page, so TYPO3 doesn't have to render that thing over and over again for each and every page like the footer, but you can cache that block as well.
Yeah. And of course there are many more optimization tips what you can do. You can use a content delivery network to speed up the delivery of pages, and when you Google for TYPO3 performance, there are quite some interesting articles and blog entries that describe how to do things. Right now, I mean, the time is up, therefore I have just covered a few of those. You had a question?
Here's one other comment as well, but it might not be suitable here then. Okay, it goes a little in the direction of the CDN delivery. Because there are multiple extensions that allow you to run multiple domains, including CDN domains, but at the same server. And if you do that and distribute your assets through 5 domains, then you have 5 times the requests possible at the same time. That will also speed up the site drastically, because usually nowadays the bandwidth is not the problem to the server.
Yeah.
It's usually
You
response.
could deliver all your images from one subdomain, all your CSS files from another subdomain, the JavaScript files from a third subdomain. They're all going to the same server, but since the domain name is different, you're tracking that number of concurrent connection a little bit.
I would even go further and make cookieless domains out of that, so no cookie is served with that domain as well, because that's traffic as well. You have another request there.
Yeah.
Sure.
You had another question?
Yeah, can I have the microphone? I've seen that you configured Apache so that it caches everything. It tells the browser that it can cache all the assets.
Yes.
And I saw the line HTML also caching one day, which I think is you need to think about that before you do that.
Yeah, if you have, for example, if you have dynamic content on your page,
Yes.
then
I just wanted to note that because that can be a really fucking you up.
Olivier?
Clear front end. It doesn't happen.
I just wanted to confirm one thing with TT News and the select from categories. I know that everybody of us has those portal-like websites, and everybody likes to use TT News for that. So especially because you can categories and everything comes naturally. This is one of the biggest performance hogs that you will ever encounter. So I rather have a look at the queries that are down there. That sometimes it's worth to rebuild the query itself into
to optimize that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
because otherwise you'll be ending up having page generation times of whatever, and especially like with XSpace and.
And this is where the slow query feature is very good, because it actually shows you those queries that take a long time to process, and then you can think about how to optimize those.
Yeah.
Yes, I haven't heard anything about the opcode cache. Or what are the pros and cons? Opcode.
Well, in older PHP versions, there was no opcode cache at all, and there were some additional software products like APC cache and so on that you can install to speed up that PHP doesn't have to compile the code for every request of the file. But since PHP 5.5, an opcode cache is built into PHP, so that helps a lot to speed up things. But you can still look for alternatives, but some of those projects, those additional opcode caches for TYPO3, for PHP, they actually stopped developing once it was included in PHP 5.5. So, and PHP 7 is also a big step forward in that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, then thank you very much. And I will put the slides online.